Anyways, welcome back to the Don't Screw Up Your Kids podcast, The Freedom Through Parenting Live. We were going to talk about multi-generational households. And I happen to have grown up in a multi-generational household. So y'all have me for the next hour. One thing that I wanted to talk about, stats say that 18% of US residents live in multi-generational households where two or more adult generations live under one roof. And so they said that's roughly 59.7 million people as of 2021. I get excited about this because most people know that I was raised by my grandmother. And my mom lived in the house. When my mom had me, she brought me home from the hospital and put me in the bed with my grandma. Now, I'm from South Central Los Angeles. I grew up on 113th and Dinker. My grandmother had her room, then it was my room, then it was my mom's room. Multi-generational housing, right? And my grandmother is, I think, the forgotten generation. She was born in 1923. My mom, I think, barely missed baby boomer, or she might have been right at the tail end of baby boomer. She definitely wasn't Gen X. She was a baby boomer, and I'm Gen X. And so my mom was close enough for us to call it baby boomer, right? So we had this multi-generational household, and I loved it. It was the best thing that could have ever happened for me. My mom was still working a full-time job while my grandmother was at home with me. And what that meant is my grandmother, she didn't graduate high school. She dropped out of school to help her family. She picked cotton to help support her family in Texas, where she was from. She's the third oldest out of about 12 kids. And so, because of that, she had that responsibility of helping her family. So, she never did graduate high school. She passed away in 2010 and at 86 and a half years old, to the day 86 and a half. And but she had taught me how to read, write, and balance a checkbook before I even started kindergarten. She taught me how to sew, how to garden, how to cook. I was making Thanksgiving dinner by the time I was 12. And I wouldn't have had that experience had I been just raised by my mom and not my grandmother. Now, I had a whole lot of negative things that happened as well, but it wasn't because of my grandmother, right? My mom was in and out of the house. She was in and out of the house when I was growing up. She would move in with a boyfriend. She somehow attracted a lot of violent men. They beat her up. She'd come back home, right? But I was constant with my grandmother. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because I can't even imagine what life would have been like if I was moving out with my mom and moving back, moving out and moving back. I didn't have to experience that. And the turmoil that probably was happening in those houses, the reason why they turned violent, I didn't experience that. I had the calm of being with my grandmother. And so I remember she was disabled. She had had a stroke before I was born. She was paralyzed on one side, but she still was super self-sufficient. She was able to do her own laundry, all the things that she needed to do. I think one of the things she might have struggled with was doing my hair, but there was always somebody to do my hair. My mom still lived in the house most of the time. But with my grandmother being there and just being able to teach me how to read, I remember in fifth grade, we had to know the states and capitals. It might have been sixth grade. We had to know the states and capitals. My grandmother said, you have to spell them. I said, Grandma, nobody else has to spell them. She said, you have to spell them. And I knew how to spell every state and capital. Like, I had to memorize what states had which capitals and then spell them all. But she always pushed me to excel, and I always excelled academically. That was never a challenge for me. And then I remember she made me, spell all of the days of the week and the months of the year. So Wednesday, that got a lot of people, challenged. February, that most people couldn't spell, some people can't say even. I knew how to spell them all. And in sixth grade, Mr. Polonis down at Century Park Elementary School he gave us a test. We had to spell all the months and all the days of the week. And if we got 100%, we could abbreviate on our date on our papers. If you didn't get 100%, you had to write them all out. Well, every time you did a paper, you had to write it out. I was the only kid in the whole class who was able to abbreviate my date because I was the only one who got 100%. And that was due to my grandmother being right there with me. And so I remember growing up and my mom, my earliest memories, she was working at 32nd Street Market grocery store near USC. And she was a cashier or something like that. And I remember the days I would go with her to pick up her check or something like that. And I really loved it because, I just love being there with my mom. Everybody's like, you look just like your mom and things like that. And those were great moments. But overall, my grandmother was there for me way more than my mom was. And I remember I was probably 5 or 6 years old. We had some hamburger meat that had sat in the refrigerator for a little while. And my mom brought it to my grandma and said, "Can you smell this and see if it's still good so we know whether to cook it or not?" And I said, "I have a great idea. Why don't you cook it?" Told my mom, "Why don't you cook it and you eat it? And if you die, then me and grandma know not to eat it." Kids are brutally honest. My mom broke out in tears, but she wasn't there for me the way my grandma was. And so if anybody was going to be sacrificed by the bad hamburger meat, it wasn't going to be me and it wasn't going to be my grandma. Okay. It was going to be my mom. But that showed her the level of the relationship that we had. And I don't wish that on anybody, that you have to know that your child wants to sacrifice you. But that was the beauty of having my grandmother there. I was making Thanksgiving dinner at 12. And I remember like always needing to add a little bit more sage to the dressing. We're making the dressing from scratch. We're making the cornbread from scratch that's going in it. And I remember I would put all the stuff that I was supposed to put in it. I'd bring it to my grandma to taste it. She would say, "Put a little bit more sage." I put some more sage. I mix it up. I bring it back to her. She's like, "Put a little bit more sage." Every year, I had to put a little bit more sage. And so the last year, I'll never forget the last year that I made dressing for my grandma. I thought it was good. I said, "I think this is good enough. I'm going to put a little bit more sage." I did. I mixed it up. I brought it to her and I said, "Taste it." And she said, "It's perfect." I said, "What?" She said, "It's perfect." And it was the first time and the only time I ever made the dressing perfect without having her tell me to go back and put a little bit more sage. Right. And I got it. And if I had known that was going to be my last Thanksgiving with my grandma, I'd have messed up the dressing a little bit. But I had that relationship where she was able to teach me everything. And I remember when my daughter told me she was having my grandson. Um, she had my grandson in 2019. So she told me she was pregnant in the end of 2018. It was her senior year at UNLV. She was in Las Vegas. I was in Los Angeles at the time. And I was assistant principal at a performing arts high school. And my daughter, that next year, the beginning of my grandson was born in July, so probably sometime around April, my boss and I couldn't get along. She told me she didn't want me to come back. best thing, best thing that could have ever happened to me. Um, and my daughter said, "Well, if you're not coming back to that job, why don't you move to Vegas and help me with the baby?" Now, I have to say, number one, I was so glad to hear her say that. I might have even cried at that moment because my daughter and I haven't always had the closest relationship. But for her to say, "I want you to move to Vegas to help me with my baby," that was huge. That was huge to me. That was a priceless moment for me. So I said yes and started looking for apartments. And my daughter's like, "Let's all get an apartment together." I said, "Absolutely not. Okay, we're not doing that multi-generational household because I'm one of those mamas that's in your business. Okay. I'm the in your business mama. Okay. I'm not the one that's gonna hear y'all arguing and I'm not getting in it. I'm fully in it. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I'm saying that's the way I do it. Otherwise, don't argue around me. So us living in the same house was never gonna work out. So we didn't do that. I got my own place and it was across town from them. It's about 20 minutes, wasn't far. I mean, it was far in distance, but it was 20 minutes. Being from Los Angeles, 20 minutes is down the street. This was 20 minutes across town, but still, we were good. But growing up with my grandmother, she really taught me everything, how to fold clothes, how to do laundry, how to wash dishes, um, everything that I can possibly think of. It was by my grandmother, not my mom. My mom was working. And then when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, she got married. She moved out. She had my three brothers. I stayed with my grandma. And there was a 9 month period that I was forced to go live with my mom, which was probably the worst 9 months of my life. Um, but being with my grandmother was everything. And what's interesting is I remember talking to my brothers, and because they were raised by my mom died. Well, they were mostly raised by their dad, but my mom died when I was 15. My brothers were 3, 5, and 6 years old. And when my mom died, their dad took them and left. Um, and I still stayed with my grandma, right? I stayed with my grandma basically until she died. I had my own apartment at times, but still, I, I had my room there. I had my space there. I still had clothes there. I was always there. Um, and when I think about how I was raised, I remember telling my brothers, I said, Grandma was more like a mom to me. She was a grandma for y'all, but she was a mom to me, and it's something different. It's something special about that. And I love that. I don't love being here in Vegas, but I love being here with my grandkids. And so when I said that, when my boss told me she didn't want me back, it was the best thing that could ever happen to me, because if that hadn't happened, I probably would have still stayed at that school another year. I would have finished. I had my preliminary administrative credential, but I needed to do another year to get the permanent one, the clear credential. And I probably would have stayed there another year, which would have meant I would have missed my grandson's first year, right? I would have not been there to watch him do all of the things. During COVID, it was just me and him, right? It was and even before COVID, my daughter would be driving, I would be at home with my grandson. I had my unemployment. It was more than enough. I still drove ride share, but I would swap on and off with my daughter, and I would get to keep my grandson for the majority of the day. Right. And so getting to feed him, getting to take care of him. And when I say we are like this, we are like this. Right. We are so close. And me and all of my grandkids, I was right there when every single one of them came out. Okay. I was right there, more right there than I ever needed to be, but I was right there. And my oldest grandson, Sincere, I got to cut his cord, his umbilical cord, because his dad did the first cut, and they said he didn't cut close enough. So they were like, "You want to do the second cut?" Absolutely. So I did the second cut. Um, and just being able to be there with them from the time they came out, priceless. That's time. That's time that can never be given back. Now, just to give y'all, for those who may not know, I think most people know a lot of my story. If you follow me on Facebook, you do. If you're new here, you might not. Um, Pulling up the comments in case you guys post some comments, I'll be able to see them. But one of the things that the reason why I started this podcast is because my relationship with my kids wasn't what I wish it was. Don't screw up your kids podcast, because I know there are a ton of mistakes that I made as a parent. I had my son when I was 18 years old. I had my daughter when I was 19. And I had my son. I remember every boyfriend I had from the time my mom passed away until I had my son, I said, let's have a baby. Because when my mom died, I decided that I wanted a baby. And my kid's dad was the one who said yes. And it probably was what we would now call a trauma bond, because he also had lost his dad as a teenager. And so we ended up having my son. And I was 18 years old, 17 when I got pregnant, 18 when I had him. I was 18 when I got pregnant with my daughter, 19 when I had her. And then I started college when my kids were 2 and 3 years old. Then I went to community college for 2 years. I transferred to USC, went there for 3 years, got 2 bachelor's degrees. Then later went on and got two master's degrees, one from Loyola Marymount University with my teaching credential attached, and one in business administration that had started before I started teaching. And then I finished it after I finished my master's in elementary education. If I had it to do all over again, I probably wouldn't get any of those degrees. Max the bachelor's and probably one, right? I do see the value of having a degree. Probably I didn't see any value in business at that time, which if I knew today what I knew then, if I knew then what I know today, I would absolutely get a bachelor's degree in business. And I am going to require all of my grandkids to get a bachelor's degree in business if they're going to inherit the wealth I plan to leave them, because I need them to know how to run a business. I need them to know how to manage the money well. And yes, there are things that they can learn in courses. It's things that they can learn from me now, but I want them to at least get that bachelor's degree in business so that they can learn the things that I may not think about teaching them. Um, but having my grandson, and then when my second grandson was born, I've just been able to spend a lot of time with my grandbabies. Um, and I think it all started with the 1 year that it was just my daughter and myself together. And that was her senior year of high school. I had moved to Sacramento. Her dad had said she couldn't come. She can't come until she turned 18, he said. And then after I left, about a month after I left, he was like, come pick her up and all of her stuff. I was on the freeway within minutes. I was in my classroom when he called me on a Sunday doing lesson plans. I emailed my boss and told him I'm gonna need a sub for tomorrow. I'm gonna try to make it back. I'm gonna try to do this turnaround and come back. But if I don't, please have a sub ready. And I got in my car, went picked up my daughter, came back, made it to school probably at lunchtime, enrolled my daughter in school there. But because of that, we got to spend so much time together, and it was just me and her, because it's always been me, her, and her brother because he's older. And so now having it just be me and her, I mean, when I was teaching 11th grade U.S. history and 12th grade government econ, and I would have her come to my class. She would grade papers for me. There would be parts of the lesson I would ask her opinion on. So she was 12th grader. She got to share with the 11th graders I was teaching. And we would go to all the basketball games, all the football games, all the baseball games. Like, we were there. We were joined at the hip. I was that mom that volunteered for homecoming dance and prom and all of that stuff. So I was there. I think that first homecoming I didn't go to because I didn't want her to feel weird about it. And for prom, she asked me to be there. I was like, I always go to prom, but I wasn't going to go because it was her prom. And she was like, you're not going to go? It's like, no, I don't want to come to your prom and have you feel like my mom's at my prom, right? She was like, no, I want you to come. So I came, and we dressed. She wore a white dress, so I wore white. We took pictures together. But we just had such a good time. And so then she went away to college. She went south. She came to back to LA, went to Northridge, and then she transferred to UNLV. So I did want to go back to some of the statistics about the multi generational households. Reading, it says, wow, the number of people living in multi generational family households has quadrupled since the early 1970s. And that's interesting because, and it could be a number of reasons. I'm not an expert in this, I just know my experience. But I can imagine that the way prices have gone up, people have needed to have more generations in one household, right? You have so many people that if their parents don't have the long-term care and things like that, the parents when they get older, or grandparents when they get older, they're moving back in with their sons and daughters and their kids. right? So they'll have that multi generational household because of that. Or you may still have, I remember when I was a student at Southwest College, I had a professor, Miss Chiapelli. She was from Panama. Spanish was her first language, and her mom only spoke Spanish still. Her daughter spoke English, of course. Well, her daughter got married, her and they had four generations in their household: the grandma, the mom, the kids, my professors. So it's my professor, her mom, her daughter, and her daughter's husband, and their kid, all in one household. And Miss Chiapelli, my professor, she's from Panama, but she had married a guy from Italy. They were divorced at this time. But she said when she lived in Italy with him, her goal was to speak Italian so well that a native speaker wouldn't know that she wasn't a native speaker over the phone. And she had accomplished that. So with her grandbaby, the parents only spoke English to the kid. Miss Chiapelli only spoke Italian to the kid. Miss Chiapelli's mom only spoke Spanish to the kid, and the kid understood all three languages before she was even a year old because they compartmentalized it like that, but they tag team to teach this kid what the impossible, right? The kid learned all three languages at one time. Now, side note, because y'all know I'm an educator, so I got to take this moment to say this. I have a friend who she's black. She married her husband is Latino, and he had a horrible experience in schools in California with English as a second language. So when they had a kid, he said, "My kid's speaking English. I'm not speaking no Spanish to the kid." Well, the way Miss Chiapelli did it, where she compartmentalized, she only spoke Italian to the kid was able to understand these are the words I say with this person. The brain is so smart, right? The great grandmother only spoke Spanish to the kid. The parents only spoke English to English to the kid, and the kid understood them all. Whoa! I have two water bottles. Had two water bottles right here, and one was propping up my phone. So I picked up the one in behind, but it ended up knocking over the other phone. That was that noise. Anyways, so the phone fell down onto my desk and the water bottle fell onto the floor. Um, I should have drank some water during that 1 minute break I had. But but these multi-generational households do become very valuable for kids. And if we're looking at the best things that can happen to kids, sometimes, I won't say all the time, but sometimes that can be a good idea. Um, they said the stats say, um, okay, there's some data about the number that's still changing. They said about 8.4% of children under 18 lived with their grandparents in 2020. 8.4%. So out of 100 kids, eight of them, eight, almost eight and a half, but eight kids are living with their grandparents. Now, I don't recommend that they're living solely with the grandparents. Kids. I know that I was very much hurt by the fact that my mom wasn't there, that she left, made a whole new family, and left me with my grandmother. As much as I loved my grandmother and wouldn't have wanted to leave, it still hurt that my mom left. It hurt that she left just, and I was there with my grandma. Every opportunity that I could, I wanted to spend time with my mom, although I still wanted to live with my grandmother. So it says the growth in multi-generational living is influenced by economic pressures, caregiving needs, housing costs, and cultural shifts. Surveys show many households cite these financial and support reasons for living together. Now, because we had such a huge village, I never had to worry about my kids coming home to an empty house. They didn't have a key to the house. They were not latch key kids because somebody was always going to be there. My grandmother was going to be there. My brothers would be there when they came back. When they were teenagers, they came back to LA. They had been living in Belize for some years with their dad, and their dad brought them back to LA. And so when they were staying with us, we were all in the house together. And it just gave we had somebody was always going to be at the house. On my kid's dad's side, it was him, his uncle, his great grandmother, all in the same house. And his great grandmother had a duplex. So she was in the front house. My kid's dad and his uncle were in the back house until he passed away. And then my kid's dad had the place to himself, and my kids were there, And then they had their grandmother who had her own place, right? And so having these multi generational houses, it can be a big benefit, and definitely when you have financial challenges, when you have a tight budget, you need all hands on deck, right? It says in home buying trends, 21% of Gen X buyers purchase multi generational homes, followed by baby boomers and then by millennials. I was talking to somebody that was, oh, I think I was reading it on the Nextdoor app. There was someone who was saying that they were looking at having a multi generational household. This lady who had made the post, her daughter and her husband and their kid needed to move with them. And so she was looking to buy another house where there could be a separation between her and her husband and her daughter and her husband and kid. And so she's like, we need to have some kind of separation in the way she wanted the house structured, so that they were not all on top of each other, so that you couldn't hear what was going on here versus there, And so it says 21% of Gen X. That's almost 1 in 4. That's 1 in 5 for sure. Crazy to me. Crazy. Um, and then it says long-term census data shows the share of Americans living in these households climbed from 7% in 1971 to 18% in 2021. And it says multi-generational household prevalence varies by region, with higher rates in the South and the West. In the South and the West. And I can understand that, because some of the houses I've been to in like New York, they're pretty small. And so if you have multiple generations in one house, it could be tough, right? It doesn't have to be, but it could be. And so, I'm grateful to have some of that data to share with you all. Let's see, it is 10:34. Chat's giving me some more information to talk to y'all about, just FYI. Yeah, I guess I'll just talk a little bit more about my life. Since we have 20 plus minutes before my next guest. I'm super excited about my next guest. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off because I don't need to see that. Super excited about my next guest. And y'all probably know her, but I'm not gonna say anything. Growing up with my grandmother also meant that I had a ton of responsibilities that most kids don't have. My grandma was one of those people whose house was an open house, right? We had family members that needed a place to stay that came to her. And they always knew my grandma was going to say yes. She was going to say yes. And so she had a sister who was getting older and wanted to come and stay with her. So my grandma said yes. And then her other sister said, well, I was planning on coming. So they both came, and I ended up staying in the bed with my grandma, which was fine with me. I slept in the bed with my grandma until I was 13. But when my aunt's there, my great aunts, came responsibility. In elementary school, I was giving one of my aunts insulin shots every day. Most kids didn't have that level of responsibility, right? I didn't realize how non-traditional my life was, but it's always been that way. And then one of my aunts, both of them actually at different periods of time had to wear diapers, and I was changing adult diapers, which is why I never would become a nurse. It ain't for me. I ain't cut out for it. But I was happy to be able to help. I was happy to be able to help with my aunts, because I love them, And so I was cooking meals for everybody. I was once I started driving at 15, I'm taking folks to their doctor's appointments. Got my driver's license as soon as I turned 16, but I had my learner's permit at 15. And we had that non-traditional house. And then my aunt, the last aunt who lived with us, she ended up with Alzheimer's. And so I had crash course in how to take care of somebody with Alzheimer's. because we couldn't leave the key in the front door. We had one of those double deadbolts where it was needed a key on the inside and the outside, but you couldn't leave the key in the house in the door because she would leave. She would get out, and she would be walking down the street thinking she knows where she is, thinking that she's at her house in Texas, because the way that the Alzheimer's work is started to revert back to a period of time in her life that was far back in the past. And I remember her, my aunt Lovey, she called my son Ramian. You know, my son was probably not even a year old at that time, but she would be like, "Come here, Ramian," and I didn't know who Ramian was. But then I became friends with his mom on Facebook, and then he ended up posting something. I was like, "There's Ramian!" Like, of course, he's grown now because my son is 30, 31. He'll be 32 next month in 3 weeks. But I got to see when she reverted back, and she thought that my son was her grandson. I got to see how that type of experience plays out. And if I had been raised in a different household, I probably wouldn't have had those experiences. But it prepared me for when my grandmother got sick. She didn't get Alzheimer's, but she did have cancer. And I was taking her back and forth to her doctor's appointments. And there came a time where she was too weak to get out of the bed and take care of herself, but I had already had experience by then. So helping to take care of my grandma, I had the ability to do that and the skill set to be able to do that, as well as learn how to hold people accountable, hold doctors accountable to being clear. And this is one area that I know that I dropped the ball and I wish I had done better. And that was in asking the questions, because you trust that the doctors know what they're talking about. You trust that they have your best interest at heart, but they don't always, and sometimes they're being lazy, and so you may need to follow up with that. And I got to learn that firsthand with my with my grandma. And specifically, there was a time she was back and forth to the hospital. They wanted to remove the tumor when it was small, but my grandma was anemic. I'm also anemic, and her blood count was low, but she was also a Jehovah's Witness, so she wouldn't accept a blood transfusion. So we had to just wait for her blood count to get back up for her to have the surgery. And there was a day when I took her to the hospital and she was sick. She wasn't feeling well. And the doctor there, the ER doctor, who wasn't her normal doctor, was like, she needs a blood transfusion now or she's going to die. And um, the doctor that my grandma had, my grandma's normal doctor, not only had he taken care of her, but his dad had taken care of her. They had both been her doctor for ages. Now this ER doctor is like, oh, she's going to die today if she don't get this blood. So I called my aunt, begged her to talk my grandma into getting the blood transfusion. So I didn't want her to die, and I mean, she was 86 already, but still, that's my grandma, you know. And I remember talking to my aunt. My aunt talked to her. I'm reading her scriptures, trying to like show her that there's nothing in the Bible against you having a blood transfusion. Um, she went ahead and gave in. She had the blood transfusion. And I remember when her doctor walked in and he was like, she had a blood transfusion. And I was like, yeah, the ER doctor said she was going to die if she didn't have it. He's like, her blood count wasn't any lower than it always is. It wasn't any lower than it always is. Now, I believe that my grandmother gave up on living after taking that blood transfusion because she had been, and it's not a religious conversation, but she had been indoctrinated to believe that it was something wrong with taking blood transfusions. And because of that, I feel like she gave up on life. And so that'll always be a regret that I have to live with. Um, that I talked her into it. I was like, I'm not gonna cry today. Y'all know. They call it what, a waterhead. I'm a big waterhead. But but um I mean, my grandma was 86 and a half. And one of the things that I tell my brothers, because I had one of my brothers was really upset that I didn't force them to keep trying to like she when she was I didn't want this to be about my grandma passing away. It is being recorded. Um, while my grandmother, I thought I was going to say, she was her blood pressure started going down, and this is when she really started to pass away. She her blood pressure kept going down, and they would give her medicine to bring it back up. But also her blood was she was on dialysis, and so that was also a problem. And so they were like, what we recommend is that you don't continue to give her the medication that brings her heart back up, and her heart will stop. They said she's not going to get better. And so I said, okay. And I sat there in the hospital. It was just me, her, and the nurse. The same brothers who were mad at me, like, didn't show up at the hospital. And didn't come here to cry today. Um, I had to make that decision for the closest person in the world to me. And I made that decision because I thought about this. Is my grandma going to be able to get out of this bed and go home? Like, am I going to be able to put her in a wheelchair and push her to the car, like take her home? I didn't see that happening. And I thought about what I would want in that situation. Like, what would I want? I wouldn't want to just people to keep me alive so that I could sit in the hospital and they don't come see me and nobody comes to see me. Like, I wouldn't want that for myself. So, anyways, whew, multi-generational households. I did not come here to cry today. but my grandma is my everything, you know? And I should have known if I was going to be okay having the conversation about somebody else's household. But having it about my grandma is different. You know, and I remember telling one of my cousins, I was like, I before my grandson was born, I was like, I want to be to my grandkids what my grandma was to me. And I remember her saying, "You'll never be her." How I'm gonna get this snot out of my nose without just blowing it right now? All right, sorry, y'all. Um, but I don't want to be sitting here just sniffing. Um, my next guest says she's ready. She just texted me. Um, so I'm grateful for that. But yeah, my grandmother was my everything. And if I hadn't been raised in that type of household, I wouldn't have this experience. And while my grandkids don't live in the same house with me, you know, they've had periods where they were at my house for maybe, you know, my daughter would be at my house for like a week or whatever. She has a room at my house. So my grandbabies are here all the time. She lives across town. She's her sincere dad wants to move back to LA. And he's from LA. We're from LA. I own a house here. I don't own a house in LA. And so my daughter's like, well, we might move back to LA. And I was like, y'all might what? Like, I moved here because y'all were here. Now you're gonna move to LA, it's gonna be a problem. But I've always wanted to move back to LA. Like, yeah, I will listen, we will all be moving back to LA. My son will probably stay here because I don't know if he's gonna wanna he never wanted to leave LA. So he might be down to go. If not, he can stay here in my house. Um, but but not being there with my grandkids is not an option. And so many times I see people on social media, I'm in all the grandparents groups, first time grandmas, black grandmas, recipes. Like I'm in all the grandma groups, right? And there are some who are talking about how, they don't get to see their grandkids that often. Some of them live far from their grandkids. Some of them don't have the best relationships with their child's significant other. And so they have that separation. I'm like, it's just not an option for me. And I don't care who don't like it. I'm gonna be right there because those are my babies. And I wish I had had that relationship with my kids that I have with my grandkids. And I've always said that having my grandbabies is an opportunity for me to do over and do better. But I've also had to realize that I have to do the work to build the relationship with my kids the exact same way. When I go over to my daughter's house, like my grandbabies, I'm like, we're all arms out, right? They're jumping in my arms and all that stuff. And I realized one day, I was like, you don't go hug Janice like that. Conscious decision. I was like, from now on, when I go over her house, I'm giving her that big hug too, because she's still my baby forever, and she's 30 with 4 kids, but that's still my baby. And even though I didn't have that time, like when I had my daughter, I went back to work 2 weeks after I had her, and we just didn't have that bonding time, but it's never too late. I meet people all the time who say, like, I wish I had had your podcast years ago, but it's too late for me now. And I'm like, it's never too late. As long as somebody's still alive, it's never too late, And so, thank you. Um, it's never too late to rebuild the relationship with your kids and to build great relationships with your grandkids, and really any kids around you. So, thank y'all for taking the time to watch me, to listen to me talk about my family. Hopefully, y'all have everybody else that's scheduled to be here for the rest of the day. Although I could talk about my life forever, there's so many parts to it. I'm gonna blow my nose one more time, right quick. Now I'm all stuffed up. But if I'm gonna be stuffed up, it's gonna be about my grandma. You know, um, my goal. I created a community. It's free to join. If you go to join.dsuyk.com, which stands for Don't Screw Up Your Kids, you can register there for free. There's nothing in it yet, but my goal with that is multifold. Number one, I'll be putting some trainings and stuff in there. Some of the books that I've read, I'm gonna create a book club. Some of the books that I've read, and we can discuss together so that we can be the best that we can be. Some of my friends who are therapists, I'm going to ask them to join as well and to share. And my goal is to every week have a live discussion, but I really want it to be a community where people can get together, share their best ideas. My goal is never to have this be a platform where we tell people what to do and like this is right and this is wrong. It's not a place of judgment. It's a place of us helping each other be the best that we can. And if people can learn from my mistakes, I want to tell them. And people are people. They gonna judge, some of the things. But if people can learn from my mistakes and do things better, it's worth it. If we can make the next generation better than ours, it's worth it. You know, and for this last 9 minutes, I want to go back to the multi-generation because one of the things that stood out to me is that my grandmother, the same person who raised me, is the same person who raised my mom. And my mom ended up on drugs. I didn't smoke weed until I was 45 years old. I had gone to Jamaica. I said, I'm going to smoke weed today. Turned 45. Actually did it a couple of days after my 45th birthday. But while I was in Jamaica. And my grandmother never used drugs. My grandfather, who died before I was born, he drank. I don't know if he smoked cigarettes or whatever. But he was a veteran, fought in World War II. He was a Marine. My grandma talked about him having PTSD, where she's like a car would backfire, there'd be a loud noise, or somebody drop a book or something, and he would like hit the deck. So I'm pretty sure he was self-medicating with the alcohol. I've never known of him using drugs, but he died when my mom was like 17 or 18. He died. He was 45. He was born in 24. Um, I'm not even gonna do this math. I think she was 17 or 18 when he died. And so she started smoking cigarettes, went from cigarettes to weed, from weed on to harder drugs, and eventually ended up on crack. And so when I say the best thing that could have ever happened to me was me living with my grandma, 100%. Because my mom being on crack wasn't constantly in my face. It was more than I wanted it to be, because she would always like to use me as an excuse. She would come pick me up and then go to one of her friends' houses and stay all day, all night. And I hated it. I didn't want to go play with their friends, with or her friends' kids. I didn't want to play with them. I'd rather be at home with my grandma. Like, I didn't want to be over there. My grandmother's sister is the one that got my mom strung out on crack. I didn't want to be at her house either. I didn't want to be over there with my little cousins. Like, I was perfectly content being by myself, which is funny because I'm a very much an introvert and I'm perfectly content being by myself. People don't believe I'm an introvert. I'm a strong introvert. But I didn't want to be over there with everybody. I was fine being at home watching, all my children, General Hospital. Okay, the price is right. Like, listen, I'll be there with my grandma. We good. Um, but it perplexed me how the same grandmother who raised me raised her. And it wasn't until I was living in Memphis, I was teaching there, and I had a woman who um, I had a teacher there who was she was a substitute teacher, long term sub, and she was of that generation whose mom was the help. So she was like the age that would have been the same age as my mom. And so she said her mom was the help. Her mom was the one cleaning white folks' houses for money. She said my mom was never there in the mornings when it was time for me to go to school because she had to be there helping them go to school. She said she said her mom would do everybody's hair the night before. She would like pack their lunches the day before, and they had to get themselves ready for school in the morning. And that's when the light bulb came on. And I realized that the reason why the same person who raised my mom and raised me, we didn't have the same person. My grandma was working at that time that she was raising my mom. She wasn't at home and fully present. And my mom was kind of an only child. My grandmother had adopted her sister, her baby sister, when their mom had died. And so she had raised her, but my aunt was older than my mom by like 9 years. And so my aunt became a professional singer, went on tour. She was a Raylette. She sang with Barbara Streisand. She's in the original Star is Born, all of that. So she was gone when my mom was there and pretty much like an only child. My grandma said she would have loved to have had a whole lot of kids, but she couldn't. After she had my mom, she got pregnant in her tubes, and that was it. Um, but when I came around, my grandmother was disabled and she was at home, and it was just me and her. And so I had a different childhood. While my grandma couldn't have been there with my mom reading books like she was with me. And I mean, y'all know how kids are. It's the same book over and over again. Are we gonna read The Little Engine That Could? We gonna read The Little Engine That Could again and again and again. That was me. right? And he went, there was something that's like he went around and around and around and around and around, just like that. I don't remember the book, but I remember that line because we went around and around in that book. Um, I don't know if that was the little engine that could, but anyways, that was the book that we read over and over again. I'm so glad. I'm glad y'all can relate because you know, I'm glad you can relate. Um, and so my grandmother, because it was just me and her, I had a very different upbringing than my mom had. My mom probably was had latchkey kid. She probably was coming home with the key, and I wasn't. I came home and I had a key, but my grandma was always there. It was one time that my grandma and I had actually didn't even most of the time through elementary school, I didn't even walk myself to school. I was probably in fifth grade by the time I got to walk myself to school because my grandma would pay a lady in the neighborhood, Miss Linda, who would come walk around the corner, pick me up, walk me to school. Then she would walk back home. Then she would walk back up there to pick me up after school and walk me back home. But we got our exercise. Nowadays, kids Ubering everywhere, but that's another story for another time. But um, with my grandma, you know, I just had a different experience, and it really worked out well for me. And it definitely hindered my mom not having that experience. And my grandfather, I had heard after the war, he worked at Sears and Roebuck, and I imagined him being in a suit and tie as a salesperson. Well, the U.S. Census says, courtesy of Ancestry.com, says that he was a janitor and he worked 72 hours a week at Sears and Roebuck. I'm pausing on purpose this time because if he was working 72 hours a week and my grandma was cleaning people's houses, who was at home with my mom? And that, my friends, is why it's so important to me to get that next generation to do things a little bit different. This is why I have a home based travel business in addition to this podcast. And I encourage people to start a home based business. If you can be at home with your kids, absolutely amazing. And you get the opportunity to be there with them, to teach them, and to make sure they turn into the kids that you want them to be or what's best for them.